NewsX World. Let's take a look at some of the top stories. Russian strikes on the Ukrainian city of Sumy has killed 2 people. According to local officials, 1 died, multiple injured in Russian strikes on Ukraine, officials report. Russia's former President Dmitry Medvedev warned that retribution is inevitable, referring to recent Ukrainian attacks on strategic bomber bases. Meanwhile, Ukrainian Chief of Staff Andriy Yermak and First Deputy Prime Minister are traveling to the US, according to a Ukrainian source. At least 27 Palestinians were killed and dozens injured when Israeli troops opened fire near US-backed Gaza Humanitarian Foundation site in Rafah, according to Gaza health authorities and civil defense. Meanwhile, 3 Israeli soldiers were killed in a separate incident in northern Gaza. Harvard University has asked a U.S. district court to unfreeze $2.5 billion in research funds blocked by the Trump administration, calling the move illegal and a violation of free speech rights. 957 orders have been issued since April 14th, with arguments set for July 21st, jeopardizing critical U.S. research and academic freedom. German Chancellor Friedrich Merz stated that a Berlin court ruling would not halt his government's immigration crackdown, despite the court declaring the expulsion of 3 Somali asylum seekers as unlawful. But the court ruled Germany should have processed their claims under EU Dublin rules. Merz has acknowledged the ruling limits the government's scope, but insisted deportations would continue within the European law. South Korea is holding a snap presidential election after former President Yoon Suk-yeol was impeached over his failed attempt to impose martial law. Reports show a high turnout. By 3 p.m. local time, 30.5 million people, which is 69% of the electorate, had voted, with polls open until 8 p.m. local time. Trump's administration has asked the U.S. Supreme Court to overturn a lower court ruling that blocked mass federal layoffs as part of his plan to downsize the government. The Ninth Circuit Court has also rejected Trump's appeal, calling his move an unprecedented overreach. U.S. President Trump discussed partnering with Japan on Golden Dome missile defense project in a call with Japanese Prime Minister Ishiba, according to media reports. The Congressional Budget Office warns the shield could cost $831 billion over 20 years, while Japan's participation may strengthen its hand in ongoing tariff talks with Washington. A UN convoy on a critical food mission to Sudan's war-torn Al-Fashir came under attack overnight in North Darfur, leaving multiple casualties, according to UNICEF. The WFP and UNICEF trucks were stranded in Al-Khoma, waiting clearance when the assault struck. The perpetrators remain unknown as famine conditions deepen in the besieged region. Following another round of direct peace talks with Ukraine in Istanbul that ended without a ceasefire deal, spokesman Dmitry Peskov has said that resolving the conflict is extremely complicated and warned it would be wrong to expect immediate breakthroughs. Peskov also said a proposed 3-way summit between Presidents Vladimir Putin, Volodymyr Zelensky, and Donald Trump is unlikely to happen anytime soon. This comes amid continued escalations on the ground. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has accused Russia of deliberately targeting civilians in a rocket strike that killed 3 people in the northeastern city of Sumy. He posted video of the aftermath and called for tougher Western sanctions, saying the attack says everything one needs to know about Russia's so-called desire to end this war. Meanwhile, Russia claimed its forces had captured another village near the border in Ukraine's Sumy region and its former President Dmitry Medvedev made it clear Moscow is not seeking compromise in the ongoing negotiations. Medvedev also appeared to threaten retaliation over Ukraine drone attacks on Russian bomber bases, writing retribution is inevitable. Following the second round of talks, senior Ukrainian officials have arrived in Washington for high-level meetings with the U.S. officials, including members of President Trump's team, to discuss defense and economic support as well as push for further sanctions on Russia. Russian drones also struck multiple Ukrainian cities overnight. One person was killed in Kharkiv, 4 were hospitalized in Chernihiv, and residential buildings were damaged in Odessa, where no casualties were reported. The UN declares attackers on civilians near aid sites in Gaza a war crime. Spokesperson Jeremy Lawrence urges a prompt and impartial investigation. Dozens have been killed and injured near the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation site. The UN demands those responsible be held accountable under international law. Here's what Jeremy Lawrence had to say.
On distraught civilians trying to access the paltry amounts of food aid in Gaza are unconscionable. For a third day running, people were killed around an aid distribution site run by the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation. This morning, we received information that dozens more people were killed and injured. There must be a prompt and impartial investigation into each of these attacks and those responsible held to account. Attacks directed against civilians constitute a grave breach of international law and a war crime.
This comes as the Israeli military says its troops fired at individuals half a kilometer from a US-backed aid distribution site in Gaza, claiming they posted a threat while moving towards the forces. This comes as Gaza's health ministry says at least 24 people were killed near the site. The incident is under investigation. Meanwhile, 3 Israeli soldiers were killed in intense clashes in northern Gaza. According to the Israeli military, Hamas fighters reportedly engaged troops in heavy gunfire in the area. In another development, 3 Palestinians have been reported killed and dozens were wounded near a US-backed aid distribution site in Gaza. According to local medics, the Israeli military acknowledged the incident, saying troops fired warning shots at individuals approaching their position about a kilometer from the site. The Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, which operates the center, denies that any casualties occurred at or near the facility. This comes just a day after a separate incident near the same site reportedly left at least 31 Palestinians dead. Now we move on to Asia. South Korea polls have now closed and vote counting will begin soon. All polls show Liberal candidate Lee Jae-myung leading by a significant margin. The latest Gallup survey places him at 49% favorability, while conservative Kim Moon-soo trails with 35%. Speaking outside the polling station, Liberal candidate Lee Jae-myung urged South Koreans to vote and make a decisive judgment.
자, 이번 내란 사태도 우리 국민들의 투표 참여만으로 비로소 이겨낼 수 있습니다. 특히 우리 청년들과 함께한 취지는 대한민국이 청년의 시대로 다시 되돌아갈 수 있게 해야 되고 이번 대선이 그 출발점이 됐으면 좋겠다는 소망으로 함께했습니다. 우리 국민들께서 반드시 투표에 참여하셔서 이 잘못된 결과를 빚어낸 내란 세력에 대해서 엄중하게 또 강력하게 심판해 주시기를 바랍니다.
On the last day of campaigning, Liberal candidate Lee Jae-myung bowed to supporters during a crowded rally. urging them to back his vision for change. Let's listen in.
주권자의 최종 무기 투표는 이 내란을 끝내고 빛의 혁명을 완성하는 가장 강력한 무기입니다. 투표는 총알보다 강합니다. 투표로 서로를 돕고 나라를 함께 구해 주시겠습니까?
Kim Moon-soo, the ruling People Power Party candidate in South Korea, held his campaign. He intensified efforts to rally support ahead of the election. Let's listen in.
제가 대통령이 되면 트럼프 대통령을 만나서 이 미국의 관세 자체를 세계 어느 나라보다도 대한민국에 대해서는 관세가 없거나 가장 낮도록 반드시 만들어내겠습니다, 여러분.
Now we have reporter Thomas Porteous. He's a correspondent and anchor joining us live from New Delhi. Thomas, what more can you tell us about this situation in South Korea?
Have now closed for this much anticipated election in South Korea. I just want to give you a little bit of background. This election was triggered by former President Yoon Suk-yeol imposing martial law for a brief 6 hours back on December the 3rd of last year. Then occurred an ongoing trial which ended in April, which ruled that former President Yoon Suk-yeol should indeed be impeached. This then triggered this election. In the midst of all this, South Korea has been in political turmoil, with staunch supporters of Yoon on one side and his opposition on the other, showing a political divide in South Korea. However, today, South Koreans get to choose between the People Power Party, the ruling party, and their candidate of Han Duck-soo, and the Democratic Party with the lead candidate Lee Jae-myung. Now, Lee Jae-myung is leading in these exit polls declared by most South Korean broadcasters. He is advocating for economic revitalization of South Korea, something that it has struggled with in recent times. Also, national unity, which is something that his opponent, Han Duck-soo, is struggling to gain traction with. Something that Han Duck-soo has actually, one of his controversies, he struggled to distance himself from the impeached leader of Yoon Suk-yeol. That's what people are saying. Yoon Suk-yeol is now actually facing criminal proceedings where he's actually facing life in jail. If he is found guilty of these charges he is facing because of his martial law declaration. As you've said previously, it's been a very high turnout for this election. 71% of voters turning out to vote today, some voting early on, including the two main candidates. As we've said, the polls have now closed, and we will bring you all the developments, including the results, which are expected in just a few hours' time.
Thank you very much, Thomas Porteous. Now we move on to North America. The Trump administration is racing against time, calling on trading partners to deliver their best deals as it pushes to conclude a wave of trade negotiations in just 5 weeks. A draft letter from the U.S. Trade Representative's office reveals Washington's intent to fast-track discussions launched on April 9th, when President Donald Trump temporarily halted his controversial Liberation Day tariffs following a sharp market backlash. That 90-day pause expires on July 8th. Meanwhile, talks between India and the United States could soon deliver a breakthrough. U.S. Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick says both sides have found common ground, and a final round of in-person negotiation is slated for this week in New Delhi. Let's take a listen to his remarks.
We've managed, I think, to be in a very, very good place, and you should expect a deal between the United States and India in the not too distant future. because I think we found a place that really works for both countries. We would like market access. We would like our businesses to have reasonable access to the markets. Now, in exchange for that, what India is going to want is they're going to want certain key markets that they're going to want to make sure that they have special access to the American marketplace. And so that's...
In Europe, Britain's Trade Minister Jonathan Reynolds is set to meet U.S. Trade Representative Jamieson Greer as both nations struggle to finalize a deal complicated by fresh U.S. tariffs on steel. And legal challenges continue to shadow the Trump administration's tariff strategy. The White House is now asking an appeals court to put a temporary hold on a second ruling that claims President Trump overstepped his powers by imposing widespread tariffs. Officials argue that the verdict could undermine sensitive trade talks still in progress. Now we have some breaking news coming in. Ukraine's SBU Security Service says it hit Crimea's bridge underwater with explosives. U.S. President Donald Trump insists that any Iran deal would not allow any uranium enrichment on his Truth Social account. Trump rejected reports that the U.S. proposal permits limited enrichment. Meanwhile, Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi said Tehran will soon respond to the U.S. offer. The proposal, mediated by Oman, seeks to limit Iran's nuclear activity while allowing low-level enrichment for civilian use. An Iranian diplomat has also told reporters that Iran is poised to reject the deal, calling it a non-starter that does not protect Iran's interests. According to Axios, the U.S. plan would allow Iran to enrich uranium up to 3%, enough for nuclear reactors but not bombs. Trump's administration calls the offer acceptable, but Iran demands full sanctions relief and continues to reject any restriction on enrichment. Negotiations remain tense as both sides hold firm positions on this long-standing nuclear dispute. Now we move on to North America. Harvard University asked a federal judge to issue a summary judgment ruling to unfreeze $2.5 billion in funding blocked by President Donald Trump administration, which Harvard said was illegal in a filing submitted to the U.S. District Court in Boston. Harvard said it had received 957 separate orders since mid-April, halting funding for critical research projects. These include $88 million for pediatric HIV, $12 million aimed at identifying emerging biological threats for the Defense Department, and millions more to study cancer, Parkinson's disease, as well as the dark energy. The freeze came after Harvard refused to comply with a list of demands issued by the White House. President Trump has accused the university and other elite institutions of being controlled by leftist ideologies and becoming centers of anti-Semitism. Harvard sued the Trump administration in April, alleging the funding freeze violated the school's right to free speech and was arbitrary. The Trump administration has also launched multiple investigations into Harvard, including probes into alleged threats against Jewish students and faculty after pro-Palestinian protests, as well as the university's ties to foreign governments last month. The administration revoked Harvard's ability to enroll international students, a decision now temporarily blocked in a separate lawsuit. A federal judge has scheduled arguments on Harvard's motion for summary judgment for July 21st. Secretary of State Marco Rubio spoke with Saudi Foreign Minister Prince Faisal bin Farhan Al Saud. The two discussed talks on Ukraine and Russia efforts to stabilize Syria and the ongoing situation in Gaza. Rubio also thanked the foreign minister for Saudi hospitality during the president's recent visit. Riyadh has not issued any immediate comments. Now we move on to Europe. A major political shakeup in the Netherlands. The coalition government led by Prime Minister Dick Schoof has collapsed. This comes after far-right leader Geert Wilders pulled his Party for Freedom, or PVV, out of the alliance. Wilders made the announcement on social media, saying there would be no signature for our asylum plans. The rift centers on immigration. Wilders had demanded strict new controls, including border closures, deportations of dual nationals with criminal records, and an end to asylum centers. He accused coalition partners of dragging their feet on implementing his 10-point plan, a key part of the deal that brought the government together after his election win in November 2023. But political experts have called the proposal unworkable, with some even labeling them illegal. The fallout comes just weeks ahead of the NATO summit, which the Netherlands is set to host. For now, the country faces fresh political uncertainty. Now we move on to Asia. Mongolia's Prime Minister Luv Sannam Sprine Oyun Erdene has resigned after losing a parliamentary confidence vote. He received just 44 votes, well short of the 64 needed. His resignation follows weeks of street protests in Ulaanbaatar. Thousands, mostly young citizens, rallied outside parliament demanding change. They accused the elite of hoarding coal profits while ordinary people suffer. Protests grew after reports of lavish spending by Oyun Erdene's son. The prime minister said he fought corruption but admitted neglecting public needs. He warned of possible political instability. He will stay on temporary until a new leader is appointed within 30 days. Now we move on to Africa. Rwanda-backed M23 rebels in the Democratic Republic of Congo executed at least 21 civilians over 2 days in February in the eastern city of Goma, according to a report published by Human Rights Watch. The report covers incidents on February 22 and the 23rd in a Goma neighborhood, including the shooting of 6 men and 1 woman near a military camp. A 15-year-old boy was also taken from his home and later found dead at a construction site. The group also rounded up around 20 young men at a sports field on February 23rd, accusing them of being members of the army. 3 who tried to flee were shot. A leader of M23 said the group would look into the allegations and publish findings. Human Rights Watch said the overall death toll is likely higher, with medical workers reporting over 50 bodies collected from the area over the 2 days. Now we stay in Africa. Guatemala's Attorney General's office issued arrest warrants for Colombia's Attorney General Luz Adriana Camargo and former UN prosecutor Ivan Velasquez on corruption charges. They are accused of leading a criminal structure linked to the Brazilian firm Odebrecht. Velasquez called the warrants political persecution. Guatemala requested Interpol alerts for Camargo, Velasquez, and former Guatemalan prosecutors. Colombia's foreign ministry condemned the warrants, calling them legally unfounded, an attack on international justice. Velasquez, former defense minister and current Vatican ambassador, is known for his role in exposing corruption in Guatemala. Odebrecht, involved in widespread Latin American corruption, pleaded guilty to bribery in the US in 2016. Now we move on to the Middle East. The United States is downsizing its military footprint in Syria, with plans to shut down all but one of its bases. That's the word from the U.S. envoy for Syria, Tom Barak, who spoke in an interview with Turkey's NTV. He confirmed that American forces operating under Operation Inherent Resolve are steadily reducing their presence from 8 bases down to 5, then 3, and eventually just 1. This comes 6 months after the fall of Bashar al-Assad, whose 14-year rule ended in December. Syria is now led by interim leader Ahmad al-Sharaa, backed by an Islamist-led coalition. But the US warns the country still faces deep security challenges. Sectarian tensions have flared, and efforts to unite Syria's ethnic and religious groups remain fragile. Barak, who also serves as US ambassador to Turkey, stressed that Syria remains highly tribal, but said he's hopeful progress will come. Earlier this year, the Pentagon announced plans to cut troop levels in Syria by half, bringing the number below 1,000 as the Islamic State threat has been largely reduced to scattered remnants.